Today's January 24th, 2002. This is Mark Koziol, the curator at the Syracuse Erie Canal Museum, and I'm going to be doing an interview with Isadore Warshaw, who is 100 years old, and he's going to talk to us about his life and give us some stories about the old Erie Canal and about his life and his family. Okay. I might stop it during the course of our conversation to make sure it's picking up our voices clearly.
Will it pick it up?
Well, let's just talk for a while and I'll stop it, but it's a good microphone, so it should pick up our voice. So you say you were born in Albany?
I was born in Albany, December 11th, 1901.
1901, okay. And did your parents immigrate from Europe? Or?
Yeah, the parents immigrated from Europe, yeah.
Okay.
My father was 13 years old when he came here. My mother was 2 years old.
Oh, okay. And where did they come from? Which country?
Well, my mother came from Lithuania, and my father came from somewhere in Russia. I don't know where that is.
Russia, okay.
And as a matter of fact, my mother lived in Hudson. Her parents lived in Hudson, New York. And she went to school in Hudson.
Okay.
And I lived, my parents lived in Hudson for a short time. And at the time we lived there, I went to the same school and had the same teacher my mother had.
Oh, that happened to me too. I had a few teachers my mother had 25 years previously or so when I went through school. Okay. So when they came to the States, they settled in the Albany region?
No, they settled in New York City.
Okay.
And then they moved up to Hudson. And my mother's younger brother was born in Hudson. So their name was Shapiro.
Shapiro?
S-C-H-A-P-I-R-O. Shapiro, spelled with a C.
Right, there's a C in there, yeah. Okay.
And that brother of my wife's, which is my uncle, his name was Jacob S. Shapiro, and he was the professor of history and head of the history department of City College in New York for 50 years, almost 50 years. And he wrote many books on European history. In fact, his book on modern and contemporary European history is still the standard in the colleges.
Wow.
And so,
that's very
but when I lived in Albany, I graduated I went to school number 8 on Madison Avenue, and then I went to Albany High School. I graduated Albany High School in 1919. And then I went to Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. And then after that I had about 3 semesters in the Albany Law School. And I organized a weekly newspaper in Rensselaer, New York called the Rensselaer Independent, and I was the editor and publisher of that for 10 years. And is this recording?
Yeah, why don't we pause it for 1 second? Let me pay. Okay, so you were just telling me about your education, and you went to law school after you graduated from RPI. What was some of the first few jobs you had when you were done with your education?
Well, during the Depression killed the paper, had to go out of business. So I went out on the road and I did some promotional work for newspapers in eastern New York State and Connecticut, and I worked for newspapers like the Greenwich Time and the Waterbury Democrat and a lot of other weekly newspapers that I can't remember the names. And I did a lot of promotional work for them, special advertising and special kinds of campaigns for the public, special pages. And when I was over there, I got connected on a regular employment basis with a shopping news in Stamford Shopper. And I developed a classified section for them, and I also developed a real estate section. And in the course of that real estate work, I heard about a company in Bridgeport, the City Lumber Company, that produced prefabricated homes. And I thought that would be a good thing for me to get into after the war was over. This was during the war. And so I left there, and I went down to New York University and took a course in production management to supplement my engineering. And then I went up and I got a job with the City Lumber Company, and I eventually became director of manufacturing in that place. And then later on, when the company gave up their manufacturing and they wanted to go into the consumer-oriented building supplies like the Home Depot and Heckingers and stuff like that, and it was a pioneering time. It was in the 1960s, and they asked me to organize this particular kind of an operation, and with the help of another engineer whom they hired to assist me, we organized and transformed a small hardware store that was adjacent to the lumber company and only served contractors. And so we started with that as a nucleus, and we built it up into in the side of 9 years, I built it up into a store of 20,000 square feet, which was big at that time, plus the storage space involved in carrying the various lumber items, warehousing, and we did a tremendous business and got pretty well known. As a matter of fact, I became, as a result of that operation, I became known as sort of an expert in that type of merchandising and advertising, and I had a lot of visitors from all over who came to see how we were doing it. As a matter of fact, it was noted by the Northeastern Lumbermen's Association, and I was invited to give a talk to their annual convention on 2 occasions at the Hilton Hotel in New York. One of them was on merchandising of building supplies to the consumer, and the other one was on building an image through advertising. And I did pretty well there, and as a result of that, we had visitors from lumber companies all over the Northeast that came to Bridgeport, and they wanted to know how to do it. And I was pretty cheerful about it. I told them all about how we did it, and so forth, and it was quite a nice thing. And I started that after I had retired. I was retired about 62 years old, and this was, and I started a brand new career. They asked me to do it after I retired, so I started again for the same company.
Really?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
And I worked on it until 1972. Then I retired for good down to Florida, and I was there for 30 years. But in the meantime, I had been in Connecticut when I left, when I worked in Connecticut for almost 30 years.
Oh, was that Bridgeport, Connecticut?
And around Bridgeport, yeah.
Oh, okay. I thought it was Bridgeport, New
I
York.
lived in Monroe.
Yeah.
And while I was in Bridgeport, I took part in a good many community affairs. I lived in Monroe, Connecticut, which was a suburb. I lived there for 20 years, a suburb of Bridgeport, about 12 miles north of it. And while I was there, I served as on a zoning board. I was also on the school study committee several years. I was chairman of the regional high school committee. I was also the municipal judge of the town for 2 years, and after that I was appointed by Governor Rubikoff to the Civil Rights Commission as a hearing officer. I served 14 years on that. This was all volunteer work, you know.
Okay.
And so I took quite an active part in civic affairs. We held hearings in Bridgeport and in New Haven, Hartford and New London on civil rights violations and so forth. And then when I moved down to Florida, I joined the SCORE organization, which is a division of the Small Business Administration of the government, in which we gave counseling to small businessmen without charge. I did that for 15 years.
So you've been very active all your life.
Huh?
Well, it sounds like you've been very active all your life, even when you
Oh
retired.
yeah. Then I also, at the same time, I was a member. I was a member of the Masons. I joined the Masons in Bridgeport in '46. I've been a member of it now for 55 years. And at the same time, I joined the Jewish fraternal organization called B'nai B'rith. I joined that in Bridgeport, also around 1944, something like that. And I've been a member of that for over 55 years. And while I was in Bridgeport, or in Sarasota, Florida, I joined a lodge down there, and I became the editor of their newsletter. And I got numerous awards from the State Association and from the Regional Association for excellence in editing. And I have a lot of plaques on the wall here to show these things. And
I can see that.
And I did a lot of. Then I also while I was in Florida, I contracted diabetes type 2, and I went to a hospital there, took lessons on how to take care of it. Mm-hmm. And I just did pretty well at it, and practically eliminated it. And the management there got me to give lectures to classes every week, new classes every week on how to control diabetes.
That's great.
I did that every week for 4 years as a volunteer. And they gave me, at the time I left, there's a plaque on the wall that says that I, from the Diabetes Control Department, that I gave this work. So, and there were different organizations that I was active in. I was also a member of the Bicentennial Declaration of Independence Bicentennial Commission, of Sarasota County, and I gave talks to dozens of organizations on American history, and which is a specialty of mine in my studies. And of course, I was a great admirer of DeWitt Clinton, who built the Erie Canal, and at that time he was considered to be a wild fanatic, and even Thomas Jefferson, who was a very progressive man, who was the President of the United States, he even said that he doubts that even that can be built, because it was such a tremendous job. It had to be done with shovels and pickaxes, and done all the digging done by hand, and to do it for 360 miles. They thought it was an outlandish thing, but DeWitt Clinton sold the idea, and he was so enthused about it that he put it through. As a matter of fact, the only experience that I had with the Erie Canal myself is when I was a boy in Albany. I used to go up to the Albany terminal of the Erie Canal, where they specialized at that time. They called it the lumber district. It was a lumber terminal, and they used to bring lumber down from the western part of the state in the canals. And one of the features at the canal terminal was a horse car, the old, like a trolley car that ran on tracks, but it was drawn by a horse, and the motorman held the lines for the horse. And this was one of the things from the old days before electricity that was still in existence and still used in the lumber district at the terminal, at the Erie Canal terminal in Albany at the time I went to high school, around 1919 when I graduated. And it was really fun, because the only thing that, of course we used trolley cars. Big transportation at that time was all trolley cars, not even any buses at that time. Only electric cars.
Now, from your memory of the Albany terminal, what was that area like? Was it very run down, or was it a busy, prosperous area?
It was loaded up with lumber, all lumber pulled off of the boats and piled up for distribution. It wasn't run down or anything that I could remember.
So it was a very busy wharf area.
It was still very busy at that time.
Very busy port, yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Okay, we have several photographs at the museum showing lumber boats, and the boats are so heavy with lumber they're just barely above the water line. You know, if they put any more lumber on the boat, it would sink to the bottom of the canal.
I don't know where they brought the lumber from.
Oh, well, it would come from western states, you know, from the other Great Lakes states, western New York State,
well, there was a lot of lumber in the western New York.
Sure, yeah, that's where, when the canal was built, a lot of the raw goods came from the Midwest, you know, like foods, lumber, beaver pelts. They were shipped due east, and then going west would be finished products.
Well,
like
we used
clothes.
I worked for the lumber company in Bridgeport, Connecticut. We used to get lumber from the West Coast. They used to come through the Panama Canal. In fact, the company owned one of those Liberty ships that was used during the war, and they by themselves.
No kidding.
And we got a lot of lumber from. We had a big terminal in Bridgeport. It was a very important lumber terminal, but it was all seaborne.
Right. When you lived in Albany, do you remember any stories of the canalers getting into fights on payday, or?
No, I remember the stories in the newspaper about the legislative battles over the building of the of the barge canal, and I remember when it was officially opened, there was quite a to-do about it because Albany was, I don't think Albany was the actual terminal anymore. They moved a little bit farther north, didn't they?
Yeah, they moved it up
Cohoes,
to
was it?
either Cohoes or Watervliet.
Yeah, Watervliet. Yeah, I think it was Watervliet. They moved it then, but originally Albany was the terminal.
Right.
And then they moved it to Watervliet. And
were you there at the opening ceremonies for the barge canal?
well, I didn't actually attend the ceremonies, but I lived there, saw it in the newspapers.
Sure.
And it was quite a holiday.
I bet it was. I did a little research last year, and I wrote a short essay, which will be published soon, but Teddy Roosevelt was governor of the state of New York for a brief one-term, 2-year time period in 1899 and 1900. And at that time, the canal was in very bad shape. It had been damaged through a lot of graft. A lot of jobs had gone to people who weren't qualified to run the canal board. So patronage had really weakened the canal system. So quite a lot of people wanted to close it down.
Well, of course, the growth of the railroads also damaged it because the railroads really grew up in the last half of last century. And this thing started way back in 1820s.
Right.
And it began to pay off almost within 5 years. I think they started at Buffalo, they got down to Utica, and they paid so well that they went on from Utica on. Is that it?
Well, yeah. The canal, when it was built in the 1810s and 20s, was built in sections.
Yeah.
And they first built a short section from Rome to Utica because it was a flat area and it was easy to dig the land. And that was built within a time frame of 9 to 12 months. And then it was opened up, and then they started to ship goods.
It paid off almost from the beginning.
Oh, sure, yeah. And then they started charging tolls, and then the canal built itself out from there, and tolls were collected.
And DeWitt Clinton was taken out of the insane asylum and put in the Heroes Hall of Heroes.
Pretty much, yeah. He was proved to be right. He had a lot of courage.
And that's the way it is. We got the same situation today. If you want to get something done, nothing comes from doing nothing. With the carousel business here, people that don't know anything about it says, what do we need it for? And yet, the ones that accomplish things in this world are those that were considered nuts.
Sure. Because
the common people couldn't understand the possible envelopment of the whole thing, and people that have always most of the improvements in this country were done by people who were considered nuts, but they had money and they were willing to risk the money.
Right, and you get nothing if you risk nothing.
And the people that are against it are those that had nothing to risk, and yet their elementary logic was just weak.
Right, that's true.
And they did a great thing here by going ahead with this. With this thing, you never know how those things will wind up. There's things that started in the middle of a desert and they became great things. Look at Las Vegas.
That's right.
Las Vegas is right in the middle of the desert.
Yeah, who would want to go there?
And there's nothing
there's
there.
So many things to see
someone
there.
had an idea and they did it.
Sure.
And now it's grown. It's the biggest city in the state. And it was only a little village in the middle of the desert.
Back in 1940, there were just a couple of hotels and
the same way with
casinos.
California.
Right.
And when Jefferson bought the Louisiana Territory, the logical dumbbells, they're logical dumbbells, thought they were crazy. What are we going to do with all that wilderness? And when President Johnson through the Secretary of State. What was his name?
Which President Johnson?
President Johnson followed Lincoln.
Oh, you mean Andrew Johnson?
Yeah, they bought Alaska.
Seward.
Yeah.
Seward was the Secretary of State.
Seward was considered crazy.
Right.
And he says, what the hell do we want to buy a big refrigerator up there in the north? What is it going to do? And yet, he bought it. It was cheap enough. He paid $7 million.
Which was a lot of money back then, but today it's cheap.
Look at all the gold they've taken out of there. Look at the oil they've taken out of there.
Right.
And they've now become a state of the union. So you never can tell how these things will turn out.
No. I think for every good story, there's always one bad story because everything works out like that.
We had the same thing with this City Lumber Company and the consumer-oriented building supplies. Look at the big companies that are now in it. All they're doing tremendous business. Why? And you know, one thing about that, the advantage of those that a consumer-oriented lumber company has over a contractor-oriented one is that the people that patronize it, the men that patronize it, are the finest and the more loyal family type of person that there is in the country. For the simple reason that the reason they shop there is because they want to improve their homes.
Right.
They are oriented to their home. And you find that they are honest and earnest, and they are family oriented, and they're not the other kind. You will find, I used to talk with hundreds of them, thousands of them, because my job was to improve it. I had 3 enlargements of it. And we started with a small store, and enlarged it, we tripled it, and tripled it again. And it got to be, and then we were copied by a lot of other companies around.
It sounds like you were a model for companies, yeah.
And they said, you'd be surprised at women that came in there. They wouldn't go in an ordinary lumber place. Women came in there to buy because they knew and we held clinics every Saturday, twice, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, on how to do it. We started this clinic, and it was copied by other lumber companies that were in the same line all over the country. We showed them how to lay carpet. We showed them how to do painting of the house, the interior, the outerior, and we had experts come in from outside, and we gave door prizes for those attending, and all the women. If in order to encourage the women, we gave every woman that attended got an orchid.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. And this way we built this up, and the women liked to come there. And we had customers that came from as far away as Danbury. I asked one customer, why did you come from Danbury? I said, there are a lot of lumber companies between Danbury and Bridgeport. Oh, well, they don't have the line that you have. You cover the line. We know that if we want something, you'll have it in stock.
Right.
And we did. We carried the biggest stock of paneling, previous paneling, and lumber in the sizes that they wanted, and all these things. We had a tremendous stock.
That's great.
It was built up gradually because it was something that the people wanted. You give people something that they want, and they'll patronize you. See?
Sure.
And with men and women, they all come there. And you go in there, like the Home Depot, you go in there, you see how busy they are. There's women there too.
Right. Oh, you see plenty of women,
They
right?
sell almost everything. It's a big thing. And they're bigger today than the conventional lumber companies.
I bet they are. I'd like to go back and talk about your parents.
Huh?
Well, if you would like, I would like to talk about your parents.
Yeah.
Now, you said that they immigrated from Europe.
Yeah. My father came here around 1885.
Okay.
He escaped out of Russia. He was only 13, and they were taking him for the army. They drafted him in the army, so his folks financed him to get over. He went to Hamburg. From Hamburg, he went to Liverpool, and then he took the steerage into New York, and he made out all right. And of course, it was different with my mother's side. He came over. My grandfather came over with his family, and he was a young man then. But he came over also in the 1880s, in the 1870s or something like that. I don't remember. And a cousin of mine is looking up all that stuff now. They came over before Ellis Island was organized.
I was going to say, that's before they opened Ellis Island.
Was in the 90s. They were in the 80s.
Right.
They have no record on Ellis Island. And
well, you'll find them in the census reports.
My father worked as a butcher at first, and then he learned how to design clothing. And he was a designer for a men's clothing manufacturing company in New York City, Edward Louis and Company. And then after he got married, he left there and he moved to Albany. He married, and he was in a gents furnishing store. He opened up a gents furnishing store, and I don't know, around 1906, he moved to a little town called Albany, or Broad Alban, New York. You ever hear of Broad Alban?
Yes.
Huh?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a small town up there between Saratoga Springs and Johnstown on Route 29. I don't know why he went up there, but he opened a store up there, and he did some tailoring and he's had a men's furnishing. We lived there till about, from 1907 to 1910. And my younger sister was born there. One of my sisters was born up there. And I went to school there in the town school. It was a small town, mill town. They had a knitting industry there at the time. And it was the terminal of the Fonda, Johnstown, and Gloversfield Railroad. They came down from Fonda, and they ended it right there. They had a little railroad station, and it was a nice little town. And then we moved. He moved to Hudson, and things didn't go right. Something went wrong. I don't know what it was. I was a little kid, and he moved back to Hudson, where where my grandfather lived, and he started in the printing business there. He learned it by himself, and he bought a press, and he had a shop in the basement of our home there, and he built it up nicely, and then he moved to Albany with it, and he was one of the well-known printers in Albany for a good many years, and he moved his plant over to Rensselaer with me when I started in the newspaper. We had a printing plant over there.
And you both worked together in the same business?
Yeah. I ran the newspaper, and he ran the printing.
Oh, great.
And he printed the newspaper for me. So it was so I think I told you, I was about 10 years it lasted. I had to give it up.
Yeah. Can you remember any stories your father told you about his life in New York City shortly after he moved to the States?
He had a picture of himself in front of the place where he worked, the blizzard of 1888. He had the blizzard of 1888, the snow was up to the second-story windows in New York City. It was one of the biggest blizzards they ever had, and showed him with those big snowbanks. But I remember when I was around 5, 6 years old. I don't remember anything before that.
Sure, okay. Yeah, I was just wondering.
I went to school, when I went to kindergarten, I went to school number 12 up on Western Avenue. I can remember, I haven't been in Albany for 50 years, at least 50 years. I can remember every street from the riverfront up to Manning Boulevard. Every north-south street, and I'm pretty near every east-west street, from Livingston Avenue south to Kenwood. I can remember them, I can recite them off to you right now, and I haven't been, so I was pretty well.
So you knew the city by the time you moved, well, you knew the city well by the time you moved away from Albany.
And I remember when the state capitol was on fire.
When was that?
Yeah, the west wing of the state capitol was on fire. It took them quite a few years to repair it. And that was in 1911. The state capitol, the west wing, on the side where the Alfred E. Smith building is now. But not on that site, but on that side, S-I-G-E. The Alfred E. Smith building is a block away, is next, there's a street between. And I remember Al Smith, and I remember very well. I'm shaking hands with him, and he was a great hero of mine. I liked him very much.
Why did you like him?
Huh?
Why did you like him?
Well, I liked him the way, his attitude. I liked the fact that he grew up from a very poor neighborhood and very poor parents, and he became a national figure, and he was one of the most popular governors in the state of New York. And as a matter of fact, I didn't live far from him. I lived on Madison Avenue, not far from Eagle Street, and the governor's mansion was on Eagle Street and Elm Street. And see how I remember these?
You have a very good memory. A very good memory. Yes.
And then I remember when they put up General Sheridan's statue in front of the Capitol, and Joseph Henry's statue in front of the Albany Academy across the street from the Capitol. And then the old high school was down there on Eagle Street, and it was torn down. And the new high school started in 1913. The new high school. The last class to graduate from the old Albany High School was in 1912.
Okay. And
one of my cousins graduated from that, and he went to Cornell. And then it was up on Lake Avenue, the Albany High School, and I used to take the Beltline trolley car up there, and the fare was a nickel, and students got it for 2.5 cents.
Wow.
We got two tokens for a nickel.
It's a good deal.
So, and trolley. We had a very good trolley system in Albany. It was in Albany and Rensselaer. They went over to Rensselaer too, over the bridge. And the old railroad station was a wonderful railroad station. All the railroads came in. It was the busiest place. The railroad station on Broadway near Columbia Street. It was now it's an office building. I went by there last summer. I went by there, and they got offices. There's a marvelous building, and all the railroads are a busy place. Broadway was a big, wide street, and State Street, a big, wide street.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And it was a real booming city at the time. It was 100,000 population. And now I think it went up to 125,000. Now it's down to 100 again.
Oh, it is down? Okay.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know what the last census said. But.
Of course, the Erie Canal and the Hudson River built Albany up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And Albany got the lion's share of the prosperity away from Troy. But of course, Troy got built up through the collar and shirt industry. Arrow
right.
Collars,
That's right.
and there were some of the other. There are a lot of companies up there. There ain't nothing but collars and shirts.
Right.
And of course, they had the trained help there that was there, so they had a lot of. And but Albany was still the capital, and the big business was the politics.
Oh, of course.
And
What drew your father to the Albany region?
huh?
Why did he move from New
I
York
don't
City
know.
to Albany?
I was under 5 years old, and I don't know.
Okay. And he never told you?
No.
You just
No,
decided
as a
to
matter
move.
of fact, even my older brother, I think they moved up there after they got married. I got married, I think, in 1898.
Did he meet your mother in New York City
I don't know.
or in Albany?
I
Okay.
really don't know.
Okay.
And I think they moved to, I don't know where they made them. They never talked about it. If they talked about it, I didn't know what they were talking about anyway.
Yeah, it was nothing special.
So,
Right.
and when I was growing up, I never inquired. And,
Okay.
and I think that most kids are the same way. They don't. And that's how it's hard to set up and trace the history of a family today, especially of those days. It's very difficult. I have a cousin. He was born in Albany too, and he lives in California, and he's working hard as anything to try to trace the family. As a matter of fact, there were 4 Warshaw families in Albany. There was the oldest brother there were 4 brothers. The oldest brother was Reuben Warshaw. He lived in the North End. He lived up there. He had a grocery store, Livingston Avenue, Northborough. And then there was the second brother was Israel Warshaw. He had a grocery store on Morton Avenue, 80 Morton Avenue. And then my father had the printing store. My father originally had it in Albany. He had a gents furnishing, but when he came back to Albany, he was a printer. And then there was the 4th brother, the youngest one was Samuel Warshaw. He had a tailor shop. He had a tailor shop, and he had it in the old building that used to where the Albany Plaza is now. They tore that plaza down.
Oh, yeah.
They tore those buildings down and made that plaza in the old D&H, the D&H building.
Yeah.
And they made that thing. But he was in one of the buildings there. Then he moved to James Street, and he was on James Street when he died. His daughter took over the business, and it's still no. But she died too now, and the Warshaw tailor shop was on James Street near Maiden Lane.
Oh, wow.
I know, all these street names.
This is marvelous. Yeah, you know the streets very
You know,
well.
I remember when they tore down that whole block of buildings to make that plaza.
Yeah,
They leveled it all up, and it was a nice plaza, and the trolley cars went around it in a circle and went around in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Albany Journal was on State Street near James Street. And they had their press room on James Street, and that was run by T.J. Barnes. Barnes was the owner of it, he took a part of that D&H building, and there was the Albany Journal and the press room, a modern press room and everything. And then there was the Knickerbocker Press. Beaver Street was the news street. There were all the newspapers were down. Beaver Street was the Albany Times Union, Beaver and Green Street, and then just below Green Street was the Knickerbocker Press and the Albany Evening News, and then down on the corner of Broadway and Beaver Street was the Argus, the Albany Argus. It was a daily and weekly paper, a daily and Sunday paper, and the same way with the Knickerbocker Press and the Albany Evening News, and then there was the Sunday Telegram. And I remember when the war was over, the soldiers and sailors came home, and Dan O'Connell was in the Navy, and he ran for Alderman of Albany, and the O'Connells took over Albany. And the whole O'Connell family, and they really made something out of Albany. They did a job. They did a lot of grafting, but they said, a dollar for you, a dollar for me, a dollar for you, a dollar for me, instead of all the dollars for me.
Right.
And it really grew, and they built out the new high school. No, new high school was built before them, but then they, of course, the Democrats won out there because the Republicans had a big scandal on coal. They had a big coal scandal it's an awful lot of graft in it, and the water. They were in power so long that they did anything they were goddamn pleased. So that people got tired of them.
People got tired of
Threw them out. And then now the O'Connells have had them. They still got them.
And now the Democrats are still in power. Yeah. I think the Democrats are still in power.
And I remember all that politics then, and I don't know, there's so much to remember. It's hard to encapsulate it, but one thing that's I'll name every goddamn street, every block, all the way, one after the other, right where they're located.
I hope my memory is as sharp as yours.
Huh?
Well, I said I hope my memory is as sharp as yours when I'm your age.
I have a show that I put on.
Yeah.
I call it Geographic Gymnastics. How I organized that. I was watching Jeopardy program on the TV, and I saw these smart guys that are supposed to know everything, and they didn't even know the geography of their own country. They didn't know where certain states and cities were located, and they flunked them out.
Right.
I said, geez, that's crazy. So I started. I got out the map of the United States, and I learned the states of the Union in alphabetic order.
Well, that's good.
And then I learned all the capitals in alphabetic order, and I learned all the largest cities in alphabetic order.
That's impressive.
And then I did that down in Florida, and I gave that as an exhibition in different organizations where I was a speaker, and I've given it here also. And here's what it amounts to. I recite the states of the Union in alphabetic order, and then I go in reverse, from the bottom to the top, also in the same order.
That's great.
In reverse alphabetic order.
Yeah.
I did the same with the cities, and then with the largest cities,
Wow.
with the largest cities and the capitals. Then to find something else a little bit harder to do, I did something else. I took the capitals and the largest cities and recited them in non-alphabetic order, but in the